In climbing, most of us will get to a point where we get a feeling that we're lacking core strength. And what that is, what it means in climbing, and how to train it can often be really confusing. And what we want to talk about today is the best practice we know on how to train a core for a rock climber. If you're like me, you probably spent a lot of time early on in your life doing leg raises and crunches and sit-ups and things that would make the rectus abdominis, or the muscles right on the front of your torso, a little bit tired. But the more we understand about the core musculature in sport, the more we understand that the rectus abdominis is just one of several muscles that help us stay tight and initiate movement, effectively tying the tip of your toe to the tip of your finger, and helps us climb better and better on steep rock. So when we're building training programs, instead of thinking, how tired can I make my abs and how can I really target this zone, we really look at how can I create stability with the limbs really distally apart? How far can I get my limbs apart and still stay nice and tight? We do core training both non-specifically in a weight room environment, and then we do it in a specific environment, trying to do some core-oriented drills on a climbing wall. In order to keep your mind straight on how the core works, I like to look at it in terms of exercises, and there's 4 main groups of exercises that I like to see in a training program. The first is simply stability. That's just holding a position, and the most common one that all of us understand and have probably had experience with is a plank. But we can do all kinds of variations on that plank, but the stability part of it is I get into the position and I just hold that position. The second category that we deal with is what's called dynamic stability, and dynamic stability involves holding a plank while 1 or 2 of your limbs moves. And in such a situation, we're having to hold that stability with the other limbs, and maybe I'm lifting a weight or pulling on an elastic band, but that integrates the musculature of the core with one of the limbs, and it makes a much more difficult movement. The third category of core movements that we like to train is rotation or anti-rotation. And really that's trying to brace at the core while we're rotating the upper body, or bracing the upper body while we're rotating the lower body. There are a few exercises where I'm actually loading the lumbar spine and rotating, such as a seated Russian twist, that aren't really probably the best for our low backs. And so we do a lot more resistive or anti-rotation movements. Some things such as chops and lifts and some of the medicine ball work can be really safely done, and they are very, very sports specific, not just to rock climbing, but just to the way that humans behave in sport. The fourth category is what we would call anti-lateral flexion, and that's really best imagined in the terms of a side plank. I'm planking on my side, I'm on one elbow, and I'm trying to keep that hip from dipping to the floor. The anti-lateral flexion movements can include things that have dynamic components as well, like where I'm picking up a leg or I'm rotating into a side plank. And they can also be advanced into things like Copenhagen planks. The important components of this are that we're integrating those core musculature, all of the obliques, the rectus abdominis, the transversus abdominis, the muscles of the hip girdle, with the muscles in the legs and in the arms. And that's how we use them in sport. So when we're designing a non-specific core workout, I try to use a couple or 3 exercises from different categories. I might pick 1 anti-lateral flexion movement, 1 rotation movement, 1 stability movement, and I'll train that throughout a training cycle so I can advance those specific exercises. I recommend no more than 5 sets of one of these exercises. And I also recommend that we don't try to chase those things till failure. The reason I don't believe in training the core to a point of absolute fatigue and failure is, number 1, we don't do that in sport. And number 2, the core is already really, really good at endurance. And so we don't need to create a little teeny bit more endurance in there. Instead, I want to make the movement more difficult. I want to make the movement more awkward, and I want to always be working toward perfect control on these things. The more rest you get and the more high quality movement you get, the better you're going to be at quality control while you're climbing. The non-specific core exercises should be intensified. And what I mean by that is I don't want athletes to be doing 15 or 20 or 25 repetitions, because again, that doesn't lead us toward the path of strength. Instead, I'd rather see you closer to the realm of 3 to 5 repetitions or holding things under 10 seconds that are highly intense and require a lot of engagement from the core. We can also do core movements or core related drills on a climbing wall. I try to minimize this because skin, foot pain, joint pain, those are big limiters for us in climbing, and I'd rather see you invest your skin in hard bouldering. But we can do things like foot flyaways on a bouldering wall. We can do drills where we walk the feet around on a steep wall while holding the hands in a specific position. We can do different things where we try to reach way high out to one side and then way high out to the other with the legs, really trying to initiate core engagement. In almost all things, I'm a huge fan of more specific training and more climbing time, but it seems like athletes do a better job of using the time in their weight room sessions to develop core strength. And so on this one, I'm going to say, let's do most of our core training in the weight room and do a little bit of it in the drills that we use as we warm up for bouldering. The big takeaway in core training is it's not about fatigue. It's not about seeing your abs. It's really about being able to create enough tension that I can take the strength from my leg and use it to help propel myself up the wall. It's about keeping my hips in tight to the wall, and it's about being able to keep myself from spinning out of control on difficult movements. If we can develop a stronger core, our chance of injury is reduced, our chance of being able to send hard problems goes up, and the investment is pretty minimal. We have an entire library of different core exercises, and one of the things you might notice that I haven't mentioned is a lot of trunk flexion and hip flexion, like leg raises and sit-ups. We probably all already do some of that stuff, and although that stuff isn't terrible, I don't think it's the thing that's holding most of us back. And so when you start to program this out, do think about like diagonal chops with a cable. Think about doing elastic band challenged planking exercises. Think about doing some things with a stability ball, but things that are actually really challenging for your core and balance that require integration of a lot of the core musculature into your workout.